Welcome again to a new webinar on the series Prescribed Burning Around the World, Purposes, Principles, Policies, and Practices, hosted by the California Prescribed Fire Monitoring Program and the California Fire Science Consortium. I'm Ruth Domenech, the Technical Coordinator of the California Prescribed Fire Monitoring Program, which is a collaboration between CAL FIRE and the University of California in Davis to better assess the effects of prescribed burns. And along with me today, we have Tara Ursel, a research assistant professor from the University of Nevada in Reno, that will moderate this session. We also have the support of Katania Waldner and Autun Schaffer today. I would like also to thank the Association for Fire Ecology, the International Association of Wildland Fire, the Catalan Fire Service in Spain, and the IT department at UC Davis for supporting this webinar. In our last two webinars, I will share a bit the screen. One moment, sorry. Yeah, you should see my screen now. Yeah, well, I have to put it like this. Yeah, so sorry, too many things open. Yeah, in our last two webinars, first we had been looking at the fire use constraints around the world, the case of Europe, South America, and USA. We learned about challenges between fire ecology needs and the safety of burning in front of burners' responsibilities. In the second webinar, we focused on the applied goals for preventing wildfires. We saw the perspective of Europe, South Africa, and the USA. Again, the same problems and challenges arise using prescribed fire, confront the limits of where to apply it and how much we can get done. Prescribed fire is not a new tool, not a unique tool of Western societies, nor a unique tool for extinguishing fires. Prescribed fire is a long-term tool used by ancient civilizations to manage landscape for pasture, hunting, or farming. Today's webinar will focus on the traditional and long-time use of prescribed fire. Fire has been used for a long time by indigenous people in Australia and the USA, but only today we are recognizing their work. They saw the fire as one more element of the nature, and the knowledge and use of fire preserved the landscape we find so challenging to maintain today. Similarly, agricultural and pastoral societies have been uninterruptedly using fire as a tool to create mosaics for pasture for thousands of years. However, nowadays, we have mistakenly declared these practices as wildfires. Despite the long-standing tradition, their contributions are often overlooked, and they face increasingly regulations, constraints, and prohibitions that make it challenging to continue their activities. In this webinar, we will showcase examples in Europe and South America. But before we start the webinar today, I would like to share you some information about the artwork created by Josep Serra. He's an artist from Catalonia, but he's also a doctor. And for each webinar, Josep composes a piece of art based on the theme of the webinar. The illustration created for today's webinar show a landscape full of human chaos wounds in several directions. These burned strips will be an opportunity to avoid more serious injuries, a kind of surgery on the ground to avoid greater damages. And finally, shortly, I will address some technical issues. The webinar, as you said, as you may saw, is being recorded and will be available at the California Fire Science Consortium website in approximately 1 week. Today, each of our 3 speakers will have 15 minutes, and at the end, we will follow with the questions at the end of the 3 of them. We have a unique channel for questions. You can type there your questions, and we will try to answer all of them. And with all of that, I would like to introduce you our first speaker, Eric Rigolot, a fire ecologist and currently a research engineer at the Mediterranean Forest Ecologie Research Unit in Avignon. His work applies to forest fire management and preventive silviculture. In particular, in the 90s, he launched the National Network of Integrated Fire Use, which he led for over 15 years, contributing to the introduction of prescribed fire in the French forestry law. Good afternoon, Eric. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Good afternoon. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, good afternoon. Good morning, depending on where you are attending. Thank you, Red, for the invitation to present this topic. Well, my talk will focus on traditional fire use for agricultural and pastoral purposes in Europe. I will not detail institutional prescribed burning activities. I will only insist on the connections between the traditional and the institutional uses of fire. What I want to show you are the possibilities of mutual support between these two fire practices. Let's start by recalling that in the past, fire has been traditionally used for agricultural or pastoral purposes in Europe. Pollen and charcoal records in the Western Europe reveal the advent of slash and burn agriculture in the late Neolithic between 4,300 and 2,300 BC. Since then, the historic use of fire has been manifested in the development and shaping of a variety of land use systems. Fire became an essential tool to expand agriculture lands. The picture on the left is from around the late 19th century, and it shows Sweden agriculture in the Black Forest in Germany. And the picture on the right is from the early 20th century. It is a Danish postcard showing a fire set in place, a place named Roundball Headed, which is nowadays a protected area. Until the middle of the 20th century, slash and burn agriculture was widely used in Europe. Here it is illustrated with traditional burnings in Finland, with a photo on the left and a picture on the right. Look at the poverty of the characters represented on this picture. This slash and burn agriculture had a spatio-temporal land use pattern similar to the, let's say, shifting cultivation system. More generally, burning of grasses and shrublands for pasture was common on land that were too poor for agriculture. In particular, the heather and moor landscape, which is characteristic in Atlantic countries, are products of more than 5,000 years of burning by rural communities. In the Mediterranean region, the pastoral use of fire has continued throughout history until present. Most of the landscape feature we observe today result from this. This point is very important to understand. As a matter of fact, fire was used from the Neolithic to open and shape the landscape. This is especially true in Mediterranean mountains in general, and in the Pyrenees in particular. For our non-European audience, the Pyrenees is the mountain chain between France and Spain. These slides compile the work of the Geode Research Group, The team is from the Toulouse-Le University and is partner of a European project, IRIS, entitled Sustainable Practices to Protect and Conserve Upland Landscapes and Memories. The team reconstructed long-term history of vegetation, cover, and anthropization processes in the Pyrenees. They showed that this story is deeply connected to pastoralism and agriculture since the Neolithic. They produce pollen diagram and archaeological evidences like charcoals from charcoal kilns dated by carbon 14. They showed that fire and agropastoral practices are closely related. And with a strong intensification and anthropization in the Middle Age and in the modern period. The mountain landscape of southern Europe that we know today were built over the long term by a combination of burning and grazing. Among all the practices, the use of fire on grazing lands is the most common practice, and it has survived its early application throughout Eurasia. The objective was to maintain openness and species composition in pastures that were threatened by successions. They were traditionally burnt in a region stretching from the Atlantic to the Balkans and to even East Europe. Many shepherds and their family in all Europe are dependent for their livelihood on the productivity of grazing lands regularly maintained by fire. That's why pasture burning is still practiced in many places, although improperly prohibited by law in some countries. As a matter of fact, in the last century, most traditional burnings have been classified as a dangerous activity by many forest administrations in Europe, resulting in repressive laws and regulations. And this reduction of fire use due to legal restriction and prohibition in most European countries came in addition to the rural exodus, an important rural exodus following agricultural modernization, which was associated with the abandonment of traditional land management practices, including fire use. These two factors dramatically altered the European ecosystem. And it resulted in what? In important fuel accumulation and in increased fire danger. How did we get out of these conflicts? How could trust be restored between rural communities and authorities? Above all, the observation that a reconciliation of interest was possible between the rural communities, which need to burn to manage their land and resources, and the administration, which tries to limit fire escapes from rangeland to forests. This reconciliation of interest was helped by the scientific works on anthropology, including the work of Nadine Ribet, who has shown that the benefits of traditional fire might well outweigh the risks if it is regulated and carried out under good practices. Under these conditions, traditional fire use fully contributes to the overall fuel management. But scientific outcomes were not enough. An additional factor was needed, and this decisive factor was the development of institutional prescribed burning. Let's come back to the Pyrenees to illustrate a region where the emergence of institutional prescribed burning during the late 20th century has contributed to a revival of traditional burning use with a regulated framework. The paper mentioned here fully describes the context. Traditional burning was for-range improvement remains widespread in the Pyrenees, in the Western Pyrenees, with more than 10,000 hectares treated annually. In the Central Pyrenees, traditional use of fire is less intensively practiced, but remains alive. For instance, on this satellite view, you can see many simultaneous pasture burnings on the same day. In both Eastern and Western Pyrenees, in recent past, restrictive regulation led to poor practices, resulting in frequent fire escapes and environmental damage. It must be said that administrative constraints were partly responsible for this bad drift. Institutional prescribed burning teams and pastoral support services were the first to recognize the burning needs of rural populations, to restore trust, and they served as trust third parties towards authorities to restore trust between the two parties. This was a decisive pathway. Around 1990, local stakeholders, with the support of prescribed burning teams, developed a participatory approach to improve dialogue, to promote best practices, ultimately leading to the establishment of local fire communities. Local fire committees was a key concept for a traditional fire use renewal. Each local committee maps potential areas for pasture burning, generally at a valley scale. These areas are further categorized into 3 levels of difficulty to burn. The 2 easiest levels can be performed by shepherds themselves, but the most difficult burns are carried out by a local prescribed burning team. As a result, best burning practices have since been increased, while damage to the surrounding forest has declined. In summary, the New Deal principles were rehabilitation of traditional pastoral fire use, a participatory approach, and the support from the fire professionals. And this last point is very important. All this with the help of new tools which were progressively developed. The first one is schools that teach good burning practices. Teachers are institutional prescribed burning bosses, and students are the shepherds. The second point was an adaptive fire regulation to facilitate practice. And third, online burning declaration on an institutional website to monitor the practice. Let's zoom out first to go from the Pyrenees to the whole of France. This map details the categories of fire used for France. White spots are the location of institutional teams burning for protected area. Red spots are the 24 prescribed burning teams from suppression services. Green spots with a red circle are the location of teams from pastoral services supporting shepherds burning with or without the help of suppression services. As a global balance, traditional fire use in France remains dominant, representing 10,000 to 40,000 hectares per year, where prescribed burning represents only a max of 4,000 hectares per year, meaning that prescribed burning will never have the capacity to replace traditional burning. And the prescribed burning teams understood it well. So, common interest is to maintain traditional burnings under the best practice possible. Let's take a second zoom back on Europe. The Fire Paradox European project produced the first map of the distribution of traditional burning practices in Europe. In red, you have no traditional practices, mostly in temperate and Northern Europe. In light green, yellow, and dark green, traditional burning for grazing improvement and fire use for agriculture and other purposes. All 3 mostly located in Southern Europe. Of course, this map from 2010 will need to be updated. Another example of integration between rural and institutional uses of fire was the creation in Portugal of an agency for the integrated management of rural fires. In Portugal, following the catastrophic fire season of 2017, which killed more than 100 people, the trauma was so strong for this small country that it resulted in fundamental reforms, like no other country had put in place after fires in Europe. The flagship measure was the creation of such an agency of interministerial competency directly attached to the Prime Minister, dealing in an integrated manner with all forms of fire in the territory, including agriculture and pastoral burning. In conclusion, integrated fire management involves an integrated vision of the use of fire in rural and forest areas for better control of fires and better control of fuel. This vision recognizes different appropriate uses of fire, which all contribute to good fuel management. In this process, there is a need to recognize that there are European rural communities with a remaining fire culture which depend on the use of fire for their welfare. This is not only beneficial for them, but also contributes and constitutes a fuel management scheme which reduces fire danger. Fire-relying communities need legislative frameworks which accept and regulate their fire use activities, as well as reduce unwanted ignitions. To do so, traditional practices need the support of the institutional prescribed burning professional. And as we have seen, this is already on track. Now the next challenge for Europe is the integration of traditional knowledge within prescribed burning programs for further fire uses integration. Well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Eric, for saying so much in such a few time. I know that it's difficult, but very interesting talk. We move now to Luis Alfonso Perez, sorry, he's from Spain. He's a forestry engineer with a PhD in applied ecology. He's also a firefighter and has been extinguishing fires since 2001, mainly in the northwest of Spain. Luis is a firefighter in a country where fire use for pastures is a lifestyle. He's a member of the local community, understands anthropogenic fire regimes, and has studied the effects of prescribed fires and their seasonality. Good afternoon, Luis. It's now your turn.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hello, good afternoon, Ruth. Thank you so much for the invitation to this webinar. And let's get started with the presentation on the content to see if we can talk about it some more. Can you see it well? Ruth?
Sorry, I cannot still not see your presentation.
Vamos a compartir.
Let me start sharing my screen.
Yeah, it looks like now. Un momento, parece que sí.
1 second. I think it's working.
Espera un momento.
Just
Yo
hold
no
on.
puedo verlo.
I still can't see it.
Yes, yes. Sí, ahora sí.
There you go.
Vale. Bueno, pues nada.
Thank you. All right. So today's talk is structured in 5 different blocks. We'll get started by the fire historic presence on the work area that we have in this case is in the Atlantic framework in the west area of Europe. We will do a characterization of the fire that we have, which is different than the Mediterranean. Then we move to the control or prescribe fire as a management tool. Then we will talk about something important, which is the evolution of the behavior of the fire in the last decades, and lastly, a proposal of an adaptation to that evolution of the behavior to avoid the fires, or at least to limit that increase of the fire, which is more frequent every time. So here we have a historic presence on the Northwest Peninsular area for thousands of years of fire, anthropologically speaking, especially because of the regeneration of pastures. The Northwest Peninsular area is the one that has more fires, and because it is caused because of climate change. This is making us to have more extreme and more frequent events of fire. If we have that with an absence of the management of these fires, then we have the results that talk by themselves in a negative way, according to the evolution on the fire's behavior. To characterize the area of work where we are located, we started on this area of 770,000 hectares on the surface, out of which 60% is pastures. About fires, the fire regime that we have here is different than the one in the Mediterranean. So here, out of those 770 hectares, only 11,000 are burned, and only 72% are burned between winter and spring. So we have this seasonality marked between winter and spring. So that affects the intensity and the speed of the propagation on the fire. So the fire regimes are different compared to autumn and summer. So what gets burned, especially the pasture area. So 73% it's pasture. So we have already identified the problem on the type of vegetation. It's just pasture, especially from the Hulex genre, and they have this reproduction strategy. And then about the surface of fire, we have 7 hectares per fire, and amount per year. Well, big fires so far, we consider them big after 500 hectares. So we have only 2 big fires per year. About the causes of those fires, well, 83% of the causes are intentional, 13% are accidental. Natural cause, only 2%. All right, so prescribed fire has been used for a long time, since thousands of years ago, but it has been evolving. The process in the rural areas has been evolving, and the type of ecosystems we have has evolved as well. It gets regulated by a specific regulation that establishes several objectives and goals, including the reduce of fires and a good fuel management, because here we have pretty big fires. We have rural areas, so the houses get burned. Another goal would be the biodiversity management. And another one is the generation of pastures. So what happens with these regulations, that since the year 2023, from November till March, on these winter months, that's when they were habilitated. So since the year 2023, we have realized that it's necessary to adjust this timing. And since 2023, it's been allowed throughout the year. So the limitation is to 10 hectares. With these limitations, we have, along with other ones, with several administration issues at a smaller scale, there is not a lot of good management. So it's necessary to adapt to the current times and to the evolution in the fire's behavior. So on this graph, you can see these extreme episodes of big fires. On the last 17, 18 years, we have moved from having a big fire of 1,200 hectares, and then on 2023, it's been up to 10,000 hectares, which is the biggest fire we've had. It's a very concerning evolution. The causes are the increase of fuel load and also climate change. Those are common matters, common reasons that happen everywhere. Here we can see the methodology of execution on a controlled fire in Asturias in this case. So they are all part of the same methodology. We used a behavior pattern on the mountain sides and then another one on the sides. And sometimes we can use a pattern on behavior on the lower parts of the mountain. So these different patterns give a different intensity and a different result. And it also has to do with the seasonality. So they give a different speed to the burning of the pastures and so on. What we burn with the fires, as I remember, as I mentioned before, are pastures. That's the most common thing. Prescribed fires internally on the seasonality between winter and spring, we have low magnitude of fire burning on the pasture that's very limited, in which we do a kind of a management at a minimum level of that fuel. So we are including some of the characteristics of the flame length, and the scale is a little smaller. So this is the result of the burning. Where we have a reduction of fuel that's very low, but the burning on the pasture is still also low. And on the soil, we have none problems, none affectations. So once we make sure the traditional use of the pasture changes, in which we used to have a different type of use because we had livestock, and right now it's mostly livestock. So we need to adapt to the new situations, and we need to do a fuel management that's more efficient with a execution term that's more open. We need to open it to the whole year to have this use of fire on the autumn summer season. We did a research in which we used a prescribed fire of 7 hectares with the fuel load between 26 and 38 tons on this pasture that has a very elevated fuel load, and it made it have a higher intensity. So from here, we move to the fire behavior parameters that are more elevated with the flame that's between 4 and 9 meters. And this gives us an intensity between low and moderate. So on the season of winter, which is a lot lower, the intensity. With these intensities, we will have a revolution power, a higher revolution power on the fuel. In this case, we use a 94% of usage on the fuel and this type of burning. And we have been able to distinguish, or we have examined according to the type of behavior we applied on this burning and we have gotten different results on the use of fuel, and they are very high, and 94% in the use of fuel in this case. This type of burning is introduced based on the behavior. Also, the affectation on the soil is different, and we will also have a different result about the type of behavior that's a result on each type of fire. We only had a 2%, not even a 2% of smoldering on the soil compared to the 10% of smoldering on the behavior of Recula and 100. We also got this 80% on the head behavior. So this knowledge or this information makes us understand the pattern of behavior that we need to use when having this burning in the season specifically we need to have it on, and we have these different results. They are very different based on the smoldering that's being produced on the soil. Here we see that even though we have a higher severity, we have organic matter that was not consumed by the fire. So it's very different compared to the other winter, spring burning that we saw in the initial video. All right, so the next step of what we did was to analyze or identify the amount of regeneration based on those behaviors and comparing it to a fire that happened like 7 days later. And what we saw was that we analyzed both periods of vegetation growth, and what we noticed was that the percentage of vegetation coverage after the first vegetation growth, 9 months on the control fire, was of 55%, and with the fire was of 30%. And after the second period of vegetation growth in 19 months, we had a 90% of coverage of vegetation, which is a recovery speed, very good recovery speed of these vegetation species that we have on these ecosystems. And then another thing we noticed was that the richness of species didn't change, after the fire, not with the prescribed or unprescribed fire. So the biodiversity was not lost at all. So we have a bigger fuel consumption. We have a correct pattern of the burning. We are able to control the smoldering in this case, which is the step before vegetation regeneration. So it's a management, adaptation, and knowledge. And then that helps us make better decisions. So that's what I wanted to share with you about this fuel management and controlled fires in Asturias. So thank you very much.
Gracias, Luis. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis.
For this interesting talk. Sorry, one moment. I am. Yeah. So we'll move now to Argentina, a bit further from Asturias, and we will continue with Dario Coria. He's graduated in ecology and with a PhD in agronomic sciences. His area of expertise lies in ecology and rangeland management within the dry Chaco region in Argentina. Currently, he is a researcher at the National Institute of Agricultural Technology in Santiago del Estero. He has been focusing on wildfire management in silvopastoral systems and on the restoration of native grassland and savannas through the use of disturbances like rolling chopping and prescribed burning. Dario, good afternoon for you. You can go ahead.
Good afternoon, Ruth. Thank you so much for the invitation. I am going to share my screen.
It's working.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Then, hello everyone. I will be discussing this topic, traditional uses and management of vegetation fire in the dry Chaco of Argentina. My presentation will emphasize conceptual ideas rather than specific technical issues. I would like to highlight that in terms of fire ecology and management, I collaborate closely with colleagues from INTA, my institution, the University of Santiago del Estero, and colleagues from the University of Lleida in Spain. The topics of this presentation include a brief introduction to the dry Chaco region, the uses of vegetation fires by indigenous people and livestock producers, ecological consideration, management practices, and finally, conclusion and futures perspectives. The dry Chaco is an expansive plain spanning across Argentina, Paraguay, and Bolivia, covering a vast area of 787,000 square kilometers in South America. The climate range from arid to subhumid. Key economic activities include agriculture with 122,000 square kilometers dedicated to crops, livestock farming with population of 5.5 million cattle, 1.7 million goats, and so on, as well as extensive forestry operations. It's a very productive area. In rangeland, we face significant management challenges at sustainably employing disturbances and practices such as grazing, rolling chopping, which is a mechanic treatment for woody plant management, vegetation burns, seeding of exotic grasses to boost forage production, and forestry operation. These practices alter the structure, productivity, biodiversity, and fire regimes of ecosystems. Additionally, important challenges are the ecological restoration of ecosystem and the adaptation to climate change while meeting environmentally friendly market standards. This diagram represents a general model of the vegetation types at the local level, which are widely recognized by managers and livestock producers. When the ecological gradient, the figure A, remains well conserved, we find grassland and savannas in lowland, tall forests in upland areas, and in the midland ecotones, which are transition between forest and grassland savannas environments. Typically, fires are initiated in grassland savannas, then progress to ecotones, and eventually halt at the forest edge. A normal fire frequency for grassland savannas is once every 3-5 years. In contrast, forest areas experience significantly less frequent fires, often spaced decades apart. Figure B is the ecological gradient when it is severely altered. Then we observe that grassland savannas and tall forests give way to low forest, shrubland, and eroded areas across the landscape. In this altered landscape, vegetation fire cannot occur due to the absence of sufficient fire fuel to start and sustain the fires. In this photo, you can observe the well-conserved ecological gradient. Indigenous people extensively use fire for various purposes: hunting, improving the habitability of their home, long-distance communications, creating habitat patches in varying stages of succession to attract prey, and even warfare. Grassland savannas were the key ecosystem for these activities, as the fire could be controlled there. There are not account of indigenous people setting forest fire, likely because they are more difficult to manage and ignite. For hunting and warfare, they would set circular fires to encircle their target. To create a mosaic of different successional stages within grassland savannas, they utilize what are known as coal fires, which are easier to control under conditions of higher humidity and lower wind speeds, thus affecting only small areas. Authors believe that the indigenous people possessed extensive knowledge of the animal and plant species associated with the various successional stages. These practices continued up until the early 20th century. The widespread introduction of livestock, which consume fine fuel and led to the encroachment of woody plant in grassland savanna, coupled with territorial wars with Argentinian government, brought an end to the era of indigenous fire use. The technique employed by indigenous people have been poorly documented. At the start of the 20th century, coinciding with the decline of indigenous population, began the colonization of vast areas of the dry Chaco and the widespread introduction of livestock. The new inhabitants began employing annual fires to control woody vegetation and encourage the regrowth of highly palatable forage. Additionally, this period saw the onset of overgrazing. The issues associated with overgrazing include a reduction in fine fuel and fire frequencies, which encourage woody plant encroachment, a decrease in palatable plant species, giving rise to unpalatable ones, alteration to the native flora and fauna composition, a negative impact on soil quality, and the promotion of soil erosion. The problems associated with yearly fires include the decline in less fire-tolerant herb species, which are palatable, an increase in highly tolerant grass species, which are unpalatable when mature, a decrease in soil fertility, an increase in soil erosion. Between 1914 and 1937, at the beginning of 20th century, a combination of a high stocking rate and severe drought has led to a significant encroachment of woody plants in grassland savanna. This time is important because marked the end of the widespread fires in grasslands and savannas in the region. Although fires had been widely used, they were not implemented in a prescribed or controlled manner. Currently, using as example my provinces, Santiago del Estero, These figures show that vegetation fires are still widely used today. The first image displays fire hotspots in November 2022, which is the fire season in our region, while the second one image reveals the thousands of fire hotspots recorded in the province from 2001 to 2021. I would like to emphasize the significant number of fires, most of which are associated with modern agricultural practices. Now, I address how current livestock producers are influencing fire regimes. Medium to large scale livestock producers have the capacity to transform ecosystem regimes by creating productive grassland and silvopastoral systems, utilizing technology and making investment. Therefore, I am personally concerned about the education provided to this type of producers. Currently, education opportunities for them are quite limited, even though we possess substantial knowledge on how to conduct prescribed fire in grassland and savannas. Livestock producers should comply with the law regarding prescribed fires. Instead, small-scale producers, who are often the poorer residents of rural areas, have very limited access to technology, information, and investment opportunities. They operate in highly degraded areas where the lack of fine fuel makes it impossible to carry out prescribed fires. They primarily raise goats. An exception to this situation exists in wetland or weather areas of the Chaco, where grass productivity is still sufficient to support fires outbreaks. Here, you can see two common practices used to manage excessive shrub cover: rolling chopping, the mechanic treatment, and vegetation fires. The goal of both methods is to reduce competition from shrub cover and enhance grass productivity. Often, if there is an insufficient native grass seed bank in the soil, exotic grasses are sown during the rolling chopping process. Additionally, historically, fire like this helped to control woody plants in grassland savannas. Therefore, prescribed fires intended to manage woody plant and enhance grassland productivity need to be intense, with flames reaching approximately 3 meters, and should occur every 3 to 5 years. To protect soils, we recommend not burning the woody debris on the ground that result from rolling chopping, and the restoration of a normal fire regime, along with suitable grazing practices, enhance the forage productivity and maintain high native diversity. In our forest, it is common to create silvopastoral systems using rolling chopping, the mechanic treatment, and seeding African grasses. After 1 or 2 growing seasons, fine fuel production can reach 10 tons of dry matter per hectare, which poses a risk of causing very intense fire that can damage or kill trees. Our trees are well adapted to low to medium fire intensities, but they can be seriously damaged by higher intensities. In silvopastoral system, it is recommended to prevent fires and to perform practices to reduce the accumulation of fine fuel. The conclusions. Grassland savanna fires were historically used wisely by indigenous people. However, this practice has been lost and poorly documented. The beginning of 20th century saw the end of the traditional fire used by indigenous population and the widespread fires in native grassland and savannas, driven by overgrazing, encroachment of woody plants, and territorial conflicts between indigenous people and the Argentinian governments. A small-scale livestock producer, often the poorer residents of the rural areas, are mostly unable to conduct grassland fire due to the altered ecosystem's lack of sufficient fine fuel. Medium to large livestock producers have a significant capacity to alter ecosystem and fire regimes. That is the difference with the small scale, and should be the primary focus in educational strategies. The perspectives are in investigation, continue investigation of fire ecology and management, and in terms of extension, education activities, we must reinforce educational initiatives to promote the use of prescribed fires among livestock producers, mainly the large scale livestock producers and the governmental bodies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dario. Now it's time to the questions. I give that for Tara.
All right, thank you so much. For everyone who missed this earlier, please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box in the bottom, and I will ask them to the presenters directly. So let's get started with a question for Eric. Can you share any knowledge about traditional fire use around Mont Blanc or the Alps? How does this region's fire regimes compare to the Pyrenees?
Okay, the microphone is on. Well, to my knowledge, the traditional use of fire was less used in the Northern Alps than in the Pyrenees, although it still existed, namely in the Isère department. This is the region of Grenoble city. On the other hand, in the southern Alps, and in particular in the Mercantour Massif, this is at the Italian border, close to the Mediterranean Sea, in the hinterland of Nice. There was a lot of pastoral fires. It was common to make pastoral burnings, and it's still active today. And there are prescribed burning teams that are assisting the rural communities to continue with pastoral fires.
Okay, thank you. I want to turn to a question for all of you. And I'm wondering, how is the use in your individual regions, how is the use of fire received by the public who are not directly involved in using fires? For example, people living in cities or towns. Is there public support for increasing indigenous or traditional use of fire? And is there support in the higher levels of government or in fire management agencies? So Eric, let's start with you, and then we can go to Luis and then Dario.
The general public in the cities doesn't know a lot about fire and about how to manage fire, and they are often very critical about some constraints like smokes, especially in the valleys in the mountains, and this is the reason why the local committees, the local fire committees organized at the level of the valley. It's a good way to establish a dialogue between the population and the different actors of the fire management in the valley, foresters, hunters, pastors, and so on. But sometimes when there is a good window, a good opportunity for burning, all there are several burnings the same days, and all the valleys are burning all together, and the smoke problem is very intense, and there's a lot of critical coming from local population with no links with the pastoral community. So there is a need to reestablish the dialogue between the non-rural community and the rural community, and the urban community is one of the most difficult to sensibilize to the fire problem because they maintain a distance with this question, and they are not aware of the advantages of using fire to control the fuel and to fight a fire.
Right, thank you, Eric. And I should have said that I actually did have a follow-up question. You can address this now or later. Do you have any ideas of how to, or techniques that have been able to sort of bridge that divide and to get the public more aware or supportive of fire use? But I won't put you on the spot again. I'll move on to Luis to answer that first question. Maybe we can come back.
Can I give my opinion about that question?
Sure.
Okay, at least in Argentina in general, and in my region, Chaco region, there is a bad perception of fire use or vegetation fire by citizens in cities, especially in big cities. But what happened here is that vegetation fires are very used for agricultural practices, cultivation for crops, and also in livestock production, the practices is very used. And for me, and also it is important to highlight that the vegetation fire can be good or bad for the ecosystem or for the population, the human population, depending on the use. We here know that we can use vegetation fires as agroecologic practice, as our indigenous people used to use vegetation fires. But fire bad use causes problems to the properties, to the ecosystems. And I think we have we are knowledgeable about how to use the prescribed fire and the vegetation fires for manage our ecosystem. But the main problem is the lack of education activities for the users. That is my main concern about these issues. How to bring all the available technology to the users. Thank you.
Thank you. Luis, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Sí, nada.
Yes, I agree on that urban view of the fire. People see it as a negative aspect, and they don't make a distinction if it's a winter or spring fire under different intensity or regeneration conditions compared to the summer. Here we've used fire for thousands of years, and in the last couple of years it keeps changing, you know, because in the past there was more rural presence in a bigger management. Every farmer or rancher on their work area, they did this fuel management, and then of the livestock as well, because they have different types of livestock, and then they manage their area. They did like this micro management, and then when we add up all of those regions of all of those ranchers, so it became macro, but that kept changing with time, and now we have that fuel load that's more elevated, and that causes the fires to be bigger. But I agree with Dario that there is a lack of knowledge and education to the society to let them know that there is a type of fire that's ecologically sustainable and that we need to promote it and try to avoid or use or manage the other type of fire that's not sustainable differently. Here we get pressure, you know, to leave the fire just on the minimum surface, and they don't have this ecological criteria when making decisions, and the consequences are what we see now with that heavy fuel load and that change in the behavior and the figures and numbers that we still haven't seen and that are alarming. So there is a key role on that training and knowledge sharing with the society and with the technical staff as well, because many workers do not have knowledge, and to the political level as well. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's urgent, I would say, on that regard.
Yeah, I totally agree with Luis. I think the same is necessary to do here in Argentina and our region.
All right, thank you. And if anyone has any questions related to this or other questions, I invite you to put them in the chat, in the Q&A box, please. I want to move on to a question for Dario. Can you describe more about the introduction of exotic African grass species? Is this promoted, and what are the outcomes for restoration of native species and the continued practice of low-intensity intentional burning?
The origin of the introduction of African grasses is because the overgrazing, the heavy overgrazing which happened in our region since the introduction of livestock. Then the native grasses the overgrazing finished the native grasses. Then, and because in Argentina, we still didn't develop a native cultivar of native grasses to seed in the field. We have to use African grasses to replace the finished native grasses. Then currently the introduction of African grasses to create grassland and silvopasture system is a very common and massive practice in Chaco region. These African grasses are very productive. These African grasses are high fire tolerant. Then these species promote fires and benefit of the fire they promote. And in my opinion, we have a problem there, a big problem there, and we have to solve from the scientific community, from our institutions. We have a depth in developing native grasses species to use in the new grassland savannas and silvopasture system, which especially large-scale producers are creating. One of the main consequences of the introduction from the fire regime's point of view, one of the main consequences is the fire regimes change suddenly, quickly. The fire regimes in our ecosystem change because the introduction of these African grasses. And that is a risk. That is a risk for our forest because these kind of fires, these African grasses can cause, may get higher intensities, to reach the trees, the canopy, and create a combination of grasses, shrubs, and trees may produce forest fire. Yeah, and that damage our forest, our trees. It's a challenge. For that reason, when I started my presentation, I mentioned that the introduction of African grasses is a management challenge. On one hand, it solved the problem of forage production for livestock. But by the other hand, it changed the fire regimes. It's a big issue for us.
I'll go for one that is in Spanish, so I will read it in Spanish, so you can change the channel. So, Milen dice, hola, gracias a los tres.
Yes, hello, thank you, the three of you. It's very interesting. I think there is a conflict between that vision of the directive use of fire and another one that's the way how to live with the fire. There is a global vision, not just related to the agricultural practices in Latin America, but in Europe also with the livestock activities.
Eric, if you want to start.
I didn't quite well understood the question. Could you synthesize the main question that is asking?
Yeah, she's asking about the conflict between a most productive way of the use of fire and a way of living with the fire.
Well,
maybe Dario has to speak more about that. We don't, in Europe, there is not this most productive, like for farming, maybe for shepherds. Just your thoughts on that?
I think it's necessary to raise awareness among the population and necessary to provide them with the necessary information of these two aspects of fire, the damaging fire, which must be fought, and the useful fire carried out respecting good practices and respecting regulation. And it is important to encourage appropriate fire use, which make it possible to control the fuel. And it is important to make the population and the stakeholder understand that the traditional use of fire still cover, at least in France, 10 times more than the prescribed burning teams can achieve. So the idea is not to replace the traditional practice with prescribed burning, but to organize a kind of support for rural communities in their burning practice, to improve their practice and to make a more secure practice of traditional burning.
And Luis, do you have a response to this question about kind of a global vision for the use of prescribed fire that's sort of both about agriculture, but maybe also about other uses?
Aquí la principal,
Well,
digamos,
here the main cause of forest fires is pasture regeneration for the livestock producers. So we don't have a big intentionality on agriculture. But yes, that management on the pastures through the fire and also for the livestock, there is this association between livestock, pasture, and fire for many years ago. So the type of livestock changes, and that changes like the fuel load, and that's why that use of fire is used differently through fire. So we need a efficient regulation on this from the administration to substitute that micromanagement that the producers used to do by themselves for thousands of years because they were responsible for that administration. So we need to create regulations. So creating a forest fire is considered a felony. And that's the result of the lack of proactivity from the administration. I don't know if that responds the question clearly. And then I wanted to mention Dario and Eric about, we have some limitations on the surface for fire execution, which is 10 hectares. That's nothing. And even your territories, I don't know, which is the limit on the surface for a prescribed fire?
In the case of Argentina, I really don't know the upper limit for surfaces to control burns. But I can say you that we have a specific law for performing prescribed fires. But let me find out if already exists an upper limit for regarding to surfaces to burn, and I'll communicate to you.
Okay, let's move on to, I think the last question now, given time. In California, in the United States, cultural burning by indigenous practitioners has been increasing with proposed policy developments that would facilitate further expansions of these revived practices. Is there any hope of a similar revival of cultural fire as a complement to the educational initiatives Dario suggested for livestock owners in the Dry Chaco area? Or was the suppression of cultural fires too complete in the region? So, Dario, this question is for you mostly.
Okay. In Chaco region, the use of the fire use by indigenous people is a practice that has been lost since the beginning of 20th century. And the reasons that happened was the massive woody plant encroachment because the introduction of livestock, the overgrazing, and also the conflicts with territorial conflicts with Argentinian government. And that happened the same in Bolivia and Paraguay and other South American countries. Unfortunately, the authors, they believe that the indigenous people used to have great knowledges about how to manage fire use, a great ecological knowledges about the fire use. But all of that was lost. Perspective to recover that practices, I don't believe that will be possible because the indigenous communities currently are very poor people. The culture, the indigenous culture is almost finished. But I think still there is an opportunity to know more about how they use the fires, performing historical researches, exploring ancient document from the colony times, exploring and studying I don't know how to say it, but the explorer, the first explorer in South America wrote about the indigenous people. The few we know about them comes from those kind of sources. And I think we have the opportunity to deepen into those kind of investigations. But I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you so much. And I want to invite Eric and Luis to also say any last words you want before I turn things back to Ruth. Ruth, would you like to close out the session?
Nothing much to add. Except the fact that we are very limited in Europe in the development of prescribed burning due to a series of constraints. I spoke about the smoke problem, but there are mainly the limitations of the availability of the prescribed burning buses, and also the less and less opportunities in terms of meteorological windows to perform prescribed burnings due to climate change. All these make that area burned in the last 10 years has stabilized, and we didn't find any levers to increase that. So in order to control fuel, the best thing is to try to maintain this traditional use of fire, which complement the prescribed burning, and both use of fire can be of mutual support in order to contribute to the global fuel control.
Yeah, so Luis, do you want to add something, or I will close the session otherwise?
Vale, pues nada, yo por mí simplemente eso, que tenemos
I
que...
just wanted to say that we need to learn more and share that knowledge and put on the table the evolution on the fire's behavior. And if we don't make decisions now or change our way of acting, it will affect the future, and the future is going to be worse than the present, and we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot on our hands, a lot of training, education for the rest to make decisions and to create efficient regulations and policies on resource management.
To all of you, Eric, Luis, and Dario, for accepting our invitation today and for these amazing talks. We've learned a lot with all of you. And thanks also to Angie for the translation. She's hid here somewhere, but she's been doing an amazing work also. And thank you to all of you for attending our webinar. We hope that you enjoyed them and that you learn as much as we did. We plan to host more webinars in the coming fall and continue sharing and learning lessons from different parts of the world. So thank you so much, everyone, and hope to see you soon again. Bye.